Hello, welcome to PEP, which stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance. I'm your host, Graham Salinger, president and founder of Salinger Coaching Solutions. If you're new to PEP, this is a show where I interview folks in leadership roles about their leadership experience and what has given them a pep in their step. In other words, how they've been empowered throughout their careers and how they put a pep in other people's step. In other words, how they have empowered others. I am honored to be hosting Robert Strickling today. Robert is a former member of the President Obama administration, having served in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where he started off as Special Assistant for Environmental and Energy, and worked his way up to Staff Director for Environment and Energy. Prior to his time in the Obama administration, Robert worked in the United States Department of Energy and in the Senate, working for the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Following his time in government, Robert started a career in the private sector, where he does strategy and market analysis. Robert has a BA in political science and Latin American studies from Macalester College and, like me, is a member of the Pi Sigma Alpha Political Science Honors Society. Robert also has an MBA from Georgetown University. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Graham, great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get into it. As I mentioned in your bio, you have lots of experience in government, even being part of the Obama administration. So I'm wondering, because we focus on, at Salinger Coaching Solutions, empowering people's passions, purpose, and perseverance, I just want to start off the conversation by asking you and inviting you to talk about how you got a passion for public service in government in the first place, and specifically energy policy, how that came about for you.
Yeah, so like you, Graham, growing up in Hyde Park in the 2000s, I think we both had a front row seat to President Obama, then Senator Obama, and previously State Senator Obama representing our community. And so that was really my first introduction and foot in the door to politics and public service and specifically organizing, both seeing his message firsthand, what he was accomplishing in each of those positions, and all the excitement that surrounded both his U.S. Senate bid as well as his presidential bid was really the start of it for me. And maybe on a personal note, just as importantly as seeing the president's rise and message and movement, was seeing my family ahead of me. I'm the youngest of three brothers, and both my father and my brother were much more involved in politics than I was through most of the 2000s, and really followed their example in terms of getting involved with then Senator Obama for that historic race in 2007. Having that family connection and element to it really sucked me in. In 2007, as a family, we basically moved to Iowa for a month to see how many doors we could knock on before caucus day, and stayed all the way through the caucus. And then that continued as the primary moved across the country. And then in the general election, I was able to volunteer up in Minnesota, as you said, at Macalester College. Mm-hmm. So that was really my introduction and how I got passionate. But of course, it wasn't just about copying my dad and my brother. It was also kind of finding my own path within that world. And so, as you said, I ended up doing a lot of work in energy and environment, and that really came out of the education at Macalester, and also some internships I was fortunate enough to partake in Washington, D.C. Just like any young person, I was looking for what are those big issue areas that are kind of the challenges of our generation, and climate change is at or near the top of that list for me and for a lot of people in this country and across the world, and one that is solvable. It's not some mystery in terms of what's going on or how we might be able to fix it. It's a political issue, it's an economic issue, it's a health issue, and all those elements, becoming part of that problem-solving apparatus, both in the government and now in the private sector, is kind of what drove me as I was kind of embarking on those first few steps.
Okay. And so in terms of your journey, um, I noted that you started off in the Office of Science and Technology Policy and eventually worked your way up to Director for Environment and Energy. Um, how did that trajectory look? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so in the really cool thing about, the work that that office did, and the way that office operated, was it was such a flat organization, which is a tremendous experience as somebody in their 20s to be in a flat organization where there's every corner that you look around, there's more opportunities to pitch in and contribute.
Mhm.
So I mean, you talk about a trajectory, but it was really just finding those opportunities and finding a way to contribute to them. What was really all that was about. In that office in particular, there was just so much cool work that was going on, that even if you didn't have your own portfolio, there was always something interesting to pitch in on, and kind of roll up your sleeves and get knowledgeable about it. There are too many topics for there to be an expert for every single one, and so
Mhm.
as a result, there's opportunities for young people to help out, make a difference, and leverage some of the experts that were there.
Okay. And so what would you say were some of your highlights in your career in government, both in terms of, I know before that you were in the Senate, so you can speak from both perspectives in terms of both legislative and executive branch. What were your would have been some highlights in terms of accomplishments and success stories?
Sure. Well, in both of those roles, but especially in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, I think some of the accomplishments that I reflect most fondly on, I couldn't call my own. They were team accomplishments. There were accomplishments of colleagues who were leading just really impactful work. And in each of those cases, I
All right, as you were.
in each of those cases where the accomplishment might not have been my own, it might have been a colleague's accomplishment, it might have been a team accomplishment, but being able to reflect on that small little piece that I was able to contribute to is a source of tremendous pride. And so one of those that sticks out to me, of course, is the Paris Climate Accords, where I was not the face of that by any stretch. There were a number of really strong people at the top and the mid levels and at the working levels that were working towards that. And at the end of the day, it was an effort that took hundreds, if not thousands, of civil servants across government, and as well as private citizens, whether they're scientists or corporations, to make that happen.
Mhm.
But being able to be a contributor in my small little way, in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, we did a lot of work to try to bring in the best of the scientific community in the United States and across the world, to move forward on some of the recommendations for achieving that accord. We held events around the United Nations to support the accord, especially around access to climate data, so that communities who are feeling the effects of climate change can have the best data available to make the right decisions for their community. And so being able to, while like I said, I was by no means the leader of that effort, being able to contribute in those small ways at those events and in that way is a big source of pride.
Awesome. I appreciate you bringing up the point of teamwork in terms of the office setting and the work setting. It's a good segue to my next question, which is that at Salinger Coaching Solutions, we focus on two entry points in the work that we do in coaching. I work a lot with organizations that are facing some level of challenge that's setting them back, and that can be individual coaching for the leaders or management, but also work for developing teams as a whole. So I'm wondering, having worked in government in your legislative and executive branch experiences, what insights would you be able to share regarding ways that teams within institutions can work together to maximize efficiency and productivity?
Well, Graham, the one thing that my personal mantra on that it is all about buy-in. That when you have different actors within an organization, And we saw this at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, because oftentimes we would work with the federal agencies, across the government to work towards one goal. One of the things that fell under our office was the National Science and Technology Councils, or committees, excuse me. And each of these committees is designed to bring together the best and brightest across the government, not just in the White House, not just in the Department of Energy, but if you take an issue like the environment, and we had a committee on the environment, there's a piece of environment that is probably in every single federal agency. But just because you're the White House, you can't say, this is what we're doing, go do it. Each of those agencies has their own goals, their own objectives, and there's nothing wrong with those goals and objectives. It's about aligning them to what the overall administration is trying to get done in that space, and leveraging them so that you can get a multiplier effect. Having one agency and one agency's budget go to an issue alone, you're not going to get as much done as if you can target that and coordinate that across multiple agencies. We saw that all the time in terms of especially federal R&D spending. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on. I hope to this day in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but also in other areas of the government, including the Office of Management and Budget, to make sure that we're not double spending. Right. If two agencies both want to work on the same issue set, getting them to carve out the areas they're going to spend money in, rather than having competing efforts, and not make the best use of those tax dollars. But in order to do that, going back to your question, it's about getting that buy-in. So it's generally speaking, you're not going to get the best returns, whether you're the White House or whether you're an office in a corporation or an NGO or wherever you are, by trying to dictate the answer. And so bringing in those stakeholders early and often to make sure they're part of the process, make sure that their needs and objectives are heard and not just heard, but incorporated, so that when it comes down to making decisions or putting out real policy, all that is baked in, and nobody's coming in at the last second, trying to not seeing themselves in the final product. So buy-in. And I can't say that we did it perfectly, but it was certainly something that I think was a hallmark of at least the Obama administration's approach to governing across the federal government.
Okay. So it's interesting you mentioned the word approach to governing, and a lot of my coaching work, governing is also from the business side, the CEO, the manager, the leader, the owner is in some way also governing their staff. What are some insights you have into what you think, because I also know that you now work in business, what are some insights you think about sort of best practices in terms of governing to reach maximum productivity for especially big staffs and big organizations?
Well, one thing really sticks out to me, Graham, and that's the director of our office was a man named Dr. John Holdren, and he had a mantra that from the day you walked into the office to the day to your last day, you're supposed to keep close to heart, which was you get a lot more done if you don't care who gets the credit. And so that was our governing philosophy throughout our time at OSTP, and in any organization, but certainly in a highly political one like the White House, or like many larger corporations can be quite political as well. Being able to set some of that ego aside and say, you know what, I'm here because we're in our case, we're trying to figure out what we could do to combat climate change with the powers that were available to us. In second term of the Obama administration, we didn't have a very friendly Congress to help on that particular issue, and so it was all about how can we combat climate change based on the tools that we have available to us. And so in that framework, having these petty infights around, well, our office is really doing this, so why should, like, you shouldn't get the credit for that, or it has to be our person that's doing the speaking on that, or publishing the release, or running the meeting, whatever the case may be. It's all about being able to set that aside and say, we're not here for that. We're not here for credit. We're not here for fame. We're here for this goal and objective. And we don't care if you get all the credit, you agency or you other office within the White House, as long as it's moving the ball downfield on the issues that we're working towards.
And that was a tone that you were saying was set by your the director at the time.
Yeah, so the director, gentleman, Dr. John Holdren, was the director of the office for all 8 years, the Obama administration, and so definitely left his mark on that organization in terms of setting the tone for what the right way to accomplish things in government, and getting some of our objectives across the finish line. There are more than one, I can say, might not have gotten there had people cared too much about where the credit was gonna land.
No, but I mean, you bring up an interesting point. Is you can have all the right people in the right places with the right ideas, but have the wrong tone, and so there goes everything, right? So thank you. One of the things that you brought up was politics, which makes sense. And you sort of alluded to big organizations also having politics, right? So I do want to talk about office politics. That's kind of the reason I do the work that I do in terms of coaching. And I specifically bring in the fact that I have a master's in conflict resolution and credentials that give me a certain amount of expertise as it relates to working with business teams involved in some kind of conflict. Usually when it's a workplace conflict, it's basically office politics, right? You also alluded to not having the friendliest Congress in the second term. So having worked in a fiercely political context, what challenges did that create for your work? And what would you say are the keys to successfully navigating such challenges?
So in our case, what the effect it had was it really limited our toolbox. It didn't dramatically change the issues that we wanted to work on, and maybe at some level they did, but in my day-to-day, it didn't change that. It was much more about what are the tools that we have available to us. We're much more limited, but it also, I think, pushed us in a positive way to get more creative about some of those tools. And so one of those tools that I think the second, as I said, I was in the second term of the Obama administration, but one of those tools that I think really now is more of a best practice than a tool we were forced to use, is bringing in third-party actors, not limiting ourselves just to who is in the government, but finding ways to affect change on the outside of our system. So when you look at something like climate change, just because we can't pass the legislation or just because we don't have the budget for the federal government to go do something, doesn't mean we can't get it done or we can't influence the outcome. And so one of kind of the hallmarks of that, of the Obama White House approach to that, was they had an effort called American Businesses Act on Climate. And really the philosophy behind it was that we had tremendous convening power in the White House that wasn't intangible. People wanted to be involved. People wanted to see how they could contribute or what they could contribute. And so leveraging that and giving them a space to do that publicly. I talked before about kind of the multiplier effect from internal organizations. The same thing happened when we would bring in outside organizations to talk about an issue. We'd be making connections between organizations that might be really aligned on mission and weren't talking to each other, a month before they came by. And so bringing all those people in and realizing that it's bigger than just the people that are having conflict in the room. In this case, it was us and Congress, but that is bigger than that, and being able to recognize all these other actors that could influence the outcome or help us achieve our goals, what was really key to a lot of the progress that President Obama did make on climate in the second term. There are lots of things the agencies did as well, but from the White House specifically, that was a big part of it.
Okay. And what lessons did you learn that you can apply from that to your sort of more corporate work experience?
I mean, I think the same thing applies in a corporate setting in terms of realizing that there are actors outside of your organization that can help you achieve your goals. And so in this case, in a corporate setting, if you can't, our issue is largely about funding at OST or in the White House when we're talking about climate action. If Congress didn't want to fund it, you couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. But the same thing happens all the time in the corporate world. If you have a project that you can't get funded, and it might not be the same relationship as Congress and the White House, but it might be there's no money available. A lot of businesses right now are very cash strapped, especially consumer facing ones. As we get through this public health crisis, and so there's going to be a lot of tough conversations, across corporate America and small businesses as well, around we don't have money to do what we want to do, but we still have the same goals and objectives as we did before the budget crunch. And so realizing that sometimes there are other actors out there, and in a corporate setting, it might be more about partnerships than it is about influence, but finding those partnerships that help you get around your near-term conflict, or in this case budget crunch, to really stay focused on this is the goal that we're trying to achieve, not this is the way we've always achieved that goal, and getting creative with some of those solutions.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought it up, because there's always there are process goals and there are outcome goals, and sometimes the metrics for that, right? We want to attain this thing, and sometimes the process has to shift, and sometimes there's conflict over the process, and sometimes there's conflict over the outcome. And I'm sure that might ring true for you too. And I'm sure you had to have, like you said, you had to be flexible in your processes as things changed in Washington. Yeah, so it goes without saying that leaders of any organization, large organization, have to have some important leadership skills, and you've alluded to a number of them. Yeah, so you've already alluded to some leadership qualities, obviously, for organizations to not only be successful at the beginning, but also to leverage their success and to continue to be successful, they have to have good leaders. So what would you say are some of the most important leadership skills that you've observed while working in the Obama administration, that have helped you in the corporate world?
I think that the two leadership qualities that really started at the top with President Obama, but permeated across the White House, but I think government in general, empathy and humility. Anybody needs a little bit ego to be a public figure and be president of the United States. But when it came down to kind of the working relationships or how you approach problem solving or issue sets, that humility and empathy that, like I said, I think started at the top, but I think at every level became part of the culture of the Obama administration. From an empathy perspective, being able to connect with people, from public service, you're not just connecting with your coworkers, you're also connecting with the people that you serve, in terms of the American public, and understanding where they're coming from, what some of their needs are, what some of their hopes and dreams and desires are, and their sore points. And so being able to reach into empathy to understand that and to recognize that, and then make it part of the way that you carry yourself day to day, or the things that you focus on or don't focus on. I think it says a lot that President Obama in his first term, his number one issue, or his number was healthcare. It was also the economy. We were in the middle of a crisis. we passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to help stimulate the economy. But it was the Affordable Care Act, and not a perfect bill. Still refining it, still finding a path forward, but a bill that got at the heart of an issue that millions of Americans were really struggling with in 2008. And not to say it's all done and fixed, nobody's struggling with healthcare. Millions of Americans continue to struggle with healthcare, but being able to realize that was, from an empathetic perspective, that this was the important thing to go tackle first. Climate change, was not a new issue for the president in his second term. He might have handled it sooner, but when you look at it from an empathy perspective, healthcare is where so many Americans were hurting, and so being able to recognize that and have it be reflected in your priorities, is a major skill that I like I said, I think permeated the organization, but started with the president. And then from a humility perspective, and then I think it also applies to kind of staff to staff interactions, being able to connect with your staff on a personal level, be able to see, just like you do with the people you serve, be able to see their wants, needs, desires, stress levels. Some of that's less coming from the president, but also just in terms of other leadership skills that I think were essential to working in the White House, was being able to keep your finger on those things so that you can get ahead of interpersonal issues before they come, by understanding the people that you're working with, or the people that are working for you, or that you're working for, through that empathetic lens. And then humility, same thing, starts with the top and the president understanding, realizing that he needs to sit through the presidential brief every morning. He doesn't know what's in that presidential brief, and he can't govern without it. It sounds silly, but knowing where you need to bring in or lean on your experts, or your generals in that case, or whatever the case may be, and it takes a certain amount of humility to know that you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room on an issue. And so that's something that I think started at the top, but I think at every level in government, at least during his administration, was the operating philosophy, is that we always want the smartest people in the room to make these decisions, and if it's not us, we have to go find them and get them. In our work in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, one of our hats or our roles was to be the science advisors to the president. And so that meant if there was, while we did a lot of interesting work on policy as it related to science and technology, there's also science and technology elements to other non-science policies. So it might be an agriculture bill or an agriculture policy, but there's going to be a science element to that. And same thing with legislation that might be coming through, or things that the president might have to take quick action on. I had colleagues who, when a hurricane was forecasted, they were looking at all the data to determine, and working with NOAA to determine, what the risk factors were, what areas were likely to be impacted, and how heavily, so that the president can make those tough decisions around declarations of emergency, or getting resources in place to help the people impacted. But through all that work, it required a certain amount of humility to recognize that we weren't always going to have an expert for every issue the president needed advice on. We try to have the right staff in place, but there's too many issues with too broad a set of backgrounds to necessarily always have that person. And so part of the game, and as staff director for energy environment, myself and my boss wrestled with this all the time, was how to build the right team so that you can be responsive as much as possible. But we also knew that there was always going to be a couple issues that we couldn't have a PhD world expert on. And so when those situations arose, being able to, having the humility to identify that and say, let's go find somebody that can better serve the president for that question. And so oftentimes we'd reach into the government agencies, whether it's Department of Energy or Department of Interior, depending on whatever the issue was, to find whoever that PhD expert that we didn't necessarily have on our team was that could better solve the situation or provide the better counsel for the president.
Mhm. Yeah, so that the empathy sort of drew the purpose and gave you context for a lot of the work that you're doing, and the humility sort of forced you to be creative and think about getting other voices into the room and making it a group effort, which I don't. Have you read the book From Good to Great?
I have not, but I will look it up.
Yeah, no, it's a book about it researches companies that showed like 15 years of growth beyond what like the market would have predicted, not just like market growth, but growth beyond just like a trend that's an abnormality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what he looked at the leaders, and one of the main traits that he identified as a leadership trait was this idea of humility for all the reasons that you're talking about. So it's also beneficial from a business and governing point of view to have that level of humility.
Great. I'll check it out.
For sure. It's a great book. Yeah. So in terms of, you talked about that sort of from the top down, getting the sort of, President Obama setting that tone and things like that. What were some lessons that you personally learned in terms of your role once you became sort of the director of your specific unit?
Yeah. So, one of the things that, and I should clarify, I was the staff director. So that's kind of a chief of staff type role for the environment and energy team, which was about 25 people, kind of at its biggest size. But I think one of the toughest lessons that I learned kind of early into that promotion was understanding that, authority or mandate is really earned and not given. And so I don't necessarily mean so much as for myself, but, thinking back to some of those collaborations I was talking about with the different agencies, walking in there with a new title or with "this is what my boss wants" is probably not the right approach. And so oftentimes, and so really understanding that, that authority or that mandate for how to approach an issue needed to be earned by working with the individuals that were at those tables, building the rapport with them so that they knew you knew them. Thinking back to our conversation before about buy-in, the same thing worked in some of these interpersonal interactions to understand, understand where the other person was coming from, where their motivations were. And not to imply that anybody had nefarious motivations, but sometimes they weren't, they weren't directly aligned. They might have been slightly askance. And so to be able to understand those so that you can then channel them in the right directions, and essentially earning that authority to say this is how we should do something, by building that mutual understanding with everybody on the team. What was definitely one of the more profound leadership lessons I'd say I learned relatively early on in that role.
Well, I mean, I definitely appreciate that as a coach. I mean, my coaching business draws on the fact that I am a mediator. Like my day job is that I mediate big cases when there are motivations that are sometimes various or sometimes are not in alignment. So I appreciate mentioning the motivation aspect of it, and that definitely can have a big role in terms of team success and things like that. Another good mark of leadership is the ability to lead when there are challenging times, right? When there are setbacks, when there are roadblocks, other kinds of adversity. And so my coaching practice, again, it focuses on such leadership tests, but it looks as those leadership tests as actually opportunities for growth in terms of leaders and their teams. So I'm sure that in your career and at the White House, you and people that you managed faced setbacks. So can you speak to some examples of maybe challenges you faced or some setbacks you have experienced, and what growth came out of working through those setbacks?
Yeah, so thinking back to that lesson that I just shared around understanding that authority is earned, not given. We had a part of the set of events that led me to that learning. It started with a major event that our office was charged with putting on, that was bringing in world influencers, world leaders from foreign governments, and our office was the lead on it in turn. And so anything that went wrong was on us, as well as the agenda and some of the goals and objectives. And so we had, within that framework, we kind of had repeated challenges in terms of putting together the event, where the higher ups weren't happy with the direction. Some of the foreign governments were questioning pieces of it, and the team behind it just wasn't being responsive to some of these external challenges. So the director might say one thing, and then the team working it wasn't solving the issue satisfactorily. And so, as staff director, my job wasn't putting on the event or putting together the agenda. My job was making sure that that the director's comments on it or goals and objectives for it were heard, recognized, and addressed, and that the event was going to go on without further issue. But I didn't have direct control over it. It was indirect control with the team that was working it. And so, through that, we realized that we really weren't seeing. There's a communication breakdown where I would pass along, an information, the information from the director, recommendations, and there's a breakdown in terms of they were hearing something different than I thought I was saying. And so, what it ended up taking to resolve that was having those individual conversations with the folks involved. For lack of a better word, heart to hearts on that, really laying bare and laying out, stripping away posturing, or oftentimes when, in any workplace environment, people will hide their true meaning in an email, not necessarily because they want to be unclear, but because they think they're being more polite. That in many environments it can seem, or people from, we're both Midwesterners, we know all about Midwest nice, and so sometimes through that upbringing, you can hide your true meaning by trying to, it can feel uncomfortable to be as direct as you need to be to get it done. And so what it ended up taking was having some of those difficult direct conversations to be clear that the event was not on track to be successful, and that change was needed to get there. And so having and on the other side, I learned from having those conversations, some of the why behind it. I knew that things were off schedule. I knew that that the director was unhappy with the progress that was being made, but I didn't necessarily understand the why behind all those things were happening. And so as somebody that was relatively new in that staff director role, it was an enlightening moment to see that all those layers and identify, I'm not always going to have the answer, or I'm not always going to be able to just direct the solution. And it also, in addition to those conversations, it required trying to address some of those why needs. And so in this particular case, they were under-resourced. They didn't have enough people working on the event to pull together everything that they needed to be successful. And so identifying that and then working on a solution for them for that. Another thing that was a challenge with that particular event is that the person running it was an incredibly well-respected, talented individual, but they weren't a subject matter expert on the area of the event. And so recognizing through that one-on-one exchange with them, that heart to heart, having that be laid bare, and realize that in that particular area, they were going to need some additional assistance. Aside from just people power, they're going to need some subject matter expertise when it came down to setting some of the agenda items or some of the white papers that were going to be discussed by all these world leaders. And so realizing that, identifying it, and then importantly, following through on the pieces that, as staff director, I could actually control. And so getting them people, getting them experts, that was something that I was able to control and be a value add, rather than saying, hey, sir, ma'am, this isn't going the way it's working, do better.
Right.
That was an unproductive approach. But working through it, having those one-on-one conversations, showing some of that empathy and humility that we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
it was really key to turning that around into what was an incredibly successful initiative for our office, that is still bearing fruits to this day.
Appreciate that. One of the things that you keep recycling back to, which makes sense, is this idea of buy-in, right? And that creates alignment, which gives you focus, which means you can achieve your goals and everybody's on the same page. I come to you at a time when there's obviously a big pandemic. Science and technology is under, excuse my pun, but it's under a microscope, so to speak. And obviously the administration that replaced President Obama did not have buy-in to the same degree. And you mentioned the Paris Climate Accords, and that's obviously something that they did not have buy-in with. So I'm curious on, now that we have sort of reset with the incoming Biden administration, what your thoughts are in terms of getting back to that focus, in terms of realigning our focus on science.
Yeah, that's something that really has to happen at every level, not only of government, but of civil society. When thinking about that big an issue, it obviously starts with the president-elect. I think he's done a great job throughout the pandemic in terms of communicating around science and technology issues and public health issues, frankly. The outgoing President Trump, made fun of him for wearing a mask, but that's also leadership. Wearing a mask publicly, leading by example, and showing those values. But I think throughout kind of science and technology, in a broader sense, it starts there, but I think it's every level. It's governors. We've seen Governor Cuomo also, from a public health perspective, show a lot of leadership, as well as other governors and a multitude of mayors across the country, Republicans and Democrats. Same with governors. Governor of Ohio has been very, who's a Republican, has been very positive in terms of his public health messaging and bringing in science and technology for those conversations. And so I think from a government perspective, it's every level, all the way down to, if you work for one of those people, in your social circles, leading by example, or, sharing, what do they say? Science over fiction. And so it's every level. From a government perspective, it's every level. But it's not the government's job alone. It's also civil society and businesses, large and small, how they communicate with their employees, how they make decisions, how they portray themselves outwardly. All of these things kind of contribute to it. One of the things that was a major focus for our office in the Obama administration, and I expect to come back, is around climate education. And I think that's a great kind of microsystem in terms of understanding broader conversations around public interaction with science and technology issues. And so the real challenge around climate education is it's not just about, do people believe in climate change? Is it real? It's obviously real. More and more people are acknowledging that, but it's also understanding the effects behind it, and what you can do not only to mitigate it in terms of reducing our climate impact, but responding to its effects, and from a resiliency perspective, going into communities that used to get major hurricane once a century and now are getting them every other year, or coastal flooding or wildfires. You name the issue. Being able to have those candid conversations and those communication streams, so that both decision makers, but also the general public, has that, understands that it's unbiased, understands what goes into it, and can then, once you have all those elements, you can then move on to acceptance. And so it's a combination of leadership, but also that information flow and that transparency. I think the information flow and transparency was a hallmark of the Obama administration, and I fully expect it will be for President-elect Biden as well.
Awesome. One of the things that I think was and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a sort of a hallmark of the Obama administration, and that I anticipate will be a hallmark of the Biden administration, is both sort of the 2 C's of leadership, which is collaboration and compromise. You alluded to the governor of Ohio being a Republican, and there are some Republicans, that are, Governor Kasich, for example, right? There are Republicans who have been pretty vocal about some issues. What would you say would be your lessons in terms of the importance of collaborating with people that you disagree with? I think not only are we at a time in our country where there's, COVID and the pandemic, there's also heightened polarization and people just not communicating with people on the other side of the aisle. Having been forced to work with people on the other side of the aisle, what are some things that you think people should know about the importance of working with and speaking with people that you might fundamentally disagree with?
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly it's going to be a challenge for President-elect Biden, without a doubt. I think there are issue sets where he's going to have very productive collaborations with the other side of the aisle. And so maybe backing up to tips or lessons learned, it's about finding where you share that goal. But part of it's also about illustrating that goal. And so at the end of the day, when you're in government, it's about serving the American people. Everything else is noise, except serving the American people. And so if you can demonstrate that the work that you're trying to accomplish is going to serve the American people, you're going to have a much easier time collaborating. And so there are some issue sets out there that I think President-elect Biden will have some success collaborating with the other side on. But I think one of the lessons learned from the Obama administration, it's a little cynical, but it's also understanding the limits to that collaboration, and identifying those areas early, and realizing that you're going to have to find other partners for those. So we talked about climate change in the second term of Obama. I don't know, I'm not a political pundit. I don't know what kind of collaboration President-elect Biden might see from Congress on climate change, but I expect it will be limited at best. And so recognizing that early and identifying who those partners that are going to work with him on that issue are, and it might be corporate America. Certainly there's it might be small businesses in this country. It might be the people in this country rising up and saying we can do better. But finding those partners and working with them, rather than funneling all your efforts into a losing relationship where the other side isn't interested in working on that issue. Work with them on the issues that you do have common ground, but then find the partners you need for those objectives that they're not the right partner on. And so I think climate change is a good example of that, where I think President-elect Biden is going to have some really strong allies on that issue. They just might not happen to sit in the Capitol building here in DC. They might sit in Columbus or Indianapolis or Dallas, Texas. Right. It's gonna be the people. It's gonna be the small businesses. It's gonna be those businesses that are hurting from the effects of climate change. It's gonna be businesses or people that see that their business today, climate change presents an existential threat to it.
Mhm.
And it's not about politics. In that case, it's economics, it's health, it's safety. And those are going to be President-elect Biden's allies on that issue, not necessarily Congress.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's you know, in any sector, that's agility, right? And a big part of that is resource management and knowing when to use who and things like that. So that's awesome. While we're on the topic of President-elect Biden, off the record, you promised me some anecdotes. So here's the anecdote question. What is something that people may not know about President-elect Biden that you learned while serving in the Obama administration?
Well, Graham, I do have a good anecdote for this one, but it is an issue that I hope that if people don't see, they'll see shortly when he takes office here next month. And so the anecdote I have really illustrates, how much he cares and how much he invests in the people around him, but also the issues that he cares about. So I might be a little bit coy with some of the specifics here, but we had an effort we were running at the Office of Science and Technology Policy that was kind of it wasn't a big deal. I don't think we'd invited the president or the vice president to it. It was really important to us and to the people that were attending that meeting. We were bringing in people from across the country. Going back to the stakeholders, we were bringing in citizens and NGOs and businesses to talk about this issue set. And Vice President Biden at the time caught wind of this on a daily brief, or maybe one of his aides had mentioned it offhand. And he said, "Wow, that's a really important issue, and that's something that should get more attention than it's getting." And I'm so proud that somebody's working on that here in the White House. And so he cornered the director of our office in the hallway to get details on what room it was going to be in and at what time. And then he showed up, and he stayed for half an hour, I think. And just to put that in perspective, it's tremendously hard to get 5 minutes of somebody of his level's time, let alone half an hour without a formal scheduling request.
Mhm.
And so, we shifted the agenda a little bit to accommodate him, but at the end of the day, all the people that attended, it turned into a much more productive, maybe not productive, but a more impactful meeting for all those people that were flying in to be able to spend 30 minutes not talking to the director of our office or the assistant directors, but talking with the vice president of the United States, all because he saw the importance of the issues and he saw the people caring about it. And he didn't want to just give lip service to it, but wanted to show up for it. And to me, that it wasn't my event. But seeing him do that, I don't think you can illustrate more clearly that this is he's going to be the kind of president that is going to care, and that he's gonna put himself into those important issues. He's not gonna sit back and watch the show or play golf. You might play a little bit of golf, but everybody needs a stress relief. Who knows? But you get the idea that's not the way he's going to govern. He's gonna he cares, and he's going to show up.
Awesome. Are there any topics of point of interest that we didn't talk about in this conversation in terms of your time in government and leadership and your insights?
I mean, Graham, thanks so much for chatting with me. I'm always happy to relive the Obama days. Going back to some of the things we talked about, I don't think there's another topic, but just that empathy, humility, and person-to-person connection are really the things that when I think about President Obama or my time working in that administration, I couldn't have been prouder to work there or to learn some of those lessons while I was there.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.